Hi, I'm Alita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my December wrap-up. December is over. It was a whirlwind, to say the least. We had earthquakes, we had freezing temperatures. It's been a time. I hope everyone had a good holiday season, and if you don't celebrate, I just hope that you had a good winter season. I'm sorry if you can hear some noise in the background. My brother's room is right behind this wall, essentially, and he's a loud gamer. For the month of December, I know I had a whole TBR picked out, and I had been really excited for it. However, I don't think I completed anything on there. I can see it over here. I'm just gonna say, if you want to take a look at the December TBR, I never know what side this is gonna be on. It'll be linked above as well as down below, but just know I didn't get to any of them. So my apologies. Basically, I kind of went into December with a weird funk. I don't think I had completely gotten out of the slump that I was in October. November, I think I called it too early that I was out of the slump, and then December I kind of fell back into it in the beginning there, and basically I was just reading whatever I found appealing. So yeah, didn't do that. I do have a plan to link a TBR to basically a system that will help me control my book buying habits a bit. So hopefully that'll be a bit better. But yeah, let's just go ahead into December. My December wrap up. I read 6 books for the month of December, which equates to 1,312 pages. In terms of genres, I have 1 classic, 3 fantasy, 1 historical, and 1 sci-fi. For format, I have 5 audiobooks and 1 physical. That doesn't make sense. Did I? Hold on. Wait. Okay, so I don't have one of the books that... I forgot to update this. So 7 books. This messes up my whole thing, but just know that adds like 40 pages. It was a graphic novel, so that's just gonna add 40 pages to my page count, and basically will be contemporary for my genre. Format is another physical, so 2 physical books, 5 audiobooks. Audience, I have 5 adult, and I would say 2 new adult. And then in terms of ratings, I have 0 1 stars, 0 2 stars, 2 2.5 stars, 1 3 star, 1 3.5 star, and 3 4 stars. Giving, and this, I'll put my average rating here. Sorry, I knew I was missing something. So that's pretty cool. I read 7 books for the month of December. It's definitely more than I expected, in all honesty. So let's get into what I ended up reading. So the first book that I read for the year was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This was one I had gotten off Libro FM, so I'll put a photo here. Let me scoot. Put the cover here. This is, I'm gonna have to look it up because I don't quite, let's see. So basically it's the year, we start off in the year 2030. We kind of lead into what is then in this world is called the Arctic Plague, basically because of climate change and because of folks that are in the Arctic Circle as well as Antarctica, I believe. They're doing research and they end up finding a long frozen, now surfaced plague that ends up sweeping the world, essentially. And so we get a bunch of short stories from folks within this world of how they're dealing with it, how it affected them, as well as how society ends up viewing it, and then eventually like the changes that came along with that, and then the aftermath. So it was, I enjoyed it for the most part. I was kind of hoping just for a story. I felt that the synopsis made it sound like we were only going to follow a couple perspectives, but we're ultimately getting those perspectives throughout the whole story, rather than like a bunch of different smaller perspectives. But ultimately it was fun. I'm finding that I'm quite enjoying pandemic or epidemic type books right now. And this one I actually had at a 2.5 before, but I bumped it up to a 3 just because I read another Sequoia Nagamatsu this month, and I actually like preferred how high we go in the dark, how high we go in the dark, as opposed to the other one that I read that I will let you know about soon. Ultimately it was fine. There was parts that I felt rather forgettable. That's one thing that I find with any anthology type book, is that there's going to be stories that stand out more than others. Like I said, I would have preferred this as a full-length novel, as opposed with like a couple perspectives, as opposed to like a bunch of different perspectives. Though it was interesting to hear, get this timeline of how like the beginning of the pandemic, and then how society viewed it, how the changes they made for it. There were a couple of interesting things and like that were interesting but terrifying, particularly the amusement park, and then how the aftermath of it, and like how these, it was interesting, but I feel I personally wasn't as attached to the formatting. I think it could have been done differently and I would have enjoyed it more, if that makes sense. So yeah, I know that this was on a couple of booktubers' favorite books of 2022. Unfortunately, it just didn't hit me that way. Next, I read an ALC from Lero FM, and this is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. C.L. Polk is, I believe, a non-binary author, Canadian author who I've read from before. I read one of their other works, Witchmark, which I didn't mind, but I didn't enjoy it enough to continue on with the series. But Even Though I Knew the End was their, I think it's a novella in all honesty, because it's not very long. It's 136 pages. But we are following a sapphic couple. Particularly, we are following a magical detective who dives into the affairs of Chicago's divine monsters to secure a future with the love of her life. I'm afraid to, because it's so short, I'm afraid to spoil any more of it, but I actually really enjoyed this. This was another one that I think would have benefited from being a full-length novel. I would have really dived into it. That's one thing with C.L. Polk's writing that I'm finding, is that it's very magical and has like magical elements to it. That's what I enjoyed about Witchmark. I just didn't like the ending of Witchmark. But with Even Though I Knew the End, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. The dynamic of the characters were really in depth. It was just like the twists were nice. I gave this a 4, but like I think it would be a high 4, like a 4.5, 4.75. Like it was almost one of my favorites, but didn't quite hit the mark. And I think if it was a longer book or even like a series, I could really see myself enjoying this. But I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Libra FM, for offering it as an ALC. I really did enjoy it. And of course, the narration was really nice as well. I forget who narrated it. I know a bunch of people ended up narrating How High We Go in the Dark. Oh, that's why. Okay, so January Lavoie ends up narrating Even Though I Knew the End, which I believe January Lavoie has also done. Oh, that one that everyone is like reread because the 5th book came out recently. I actually didn't like the first one, so I'm not moving on with it. Okay, so they did, January Lavoie has done The Night Swim, The 10,000 Doors of January, The Diviners, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, so I really enjoy their narration style. It's just that The Diviners didn't interest me. This one I read, it was actually a physical book that I have. So like I said, I took my time reading some books. And just kind of went with it, but I ended up picking up The Cat Who Saved Books, a translated book by Sosuke Natsukawa. So this is translated from Japanese, Who was it translated by? Translated from Japanese by Louis Heel Kawai. So, and basically we are following a young boy, an awkward high school student, Rintaro Natsuki, who ends up, like, beginning of the book, ends up losing his grandfather. He had lived with his grandfather for years and helped him run his grandfather's small bookstore. So after his grandfather dies, Rintaro is kind of just skipping school. He's kind of like has to be prepared for his aunt to move him closer to her, and is kind of just in on himself. He ends up getting checked in on by his school representative as well as another schoolmate, and a cat ends up showing up in this bookshop and has him go save these books from these people. It was very much, I don't think I explained that well at all, but what it reminded me of was like The Little Prince combined with Studio Ghibli, in all honesty. Like, I could easily see this as a very fun and whimsical animated movie, and that had followed some themes. This is very much like a book, like love letter to books, because like how Rintaro ends up having to save books from these men. It was very interesting in terms of, like, you know, how it was very interesting. I ultimately really did enjoy it. It was just, there were some parts that lagged for me. So this one, I gave 4 stars. I would say it was like a lower 4-star. It wasn't bad. It was just like, I think the title was a little deceiving. I don't think the cat saved books at all. I think it was Rintaro. But Rintaro I liked Rintaro's growth overall, even if it was fairly subtle. But yeah, it was a fun book, and I enjoy the cover. So scoot back over here because it's another audiobook that I don't have, and that was The Night Ship by Jess Kidd. Which I kind of want the physical copy of. I know for sure I do want the physical copy of Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. But The Night Ship by Jess Kidd, I actually really enjoy this cover. It's really gorgeous. And the storyline was interesting. So this one I ended up borrowing from my library, actually. And we are following 2 different perspectives on 2 different timelines. So the first is 1629. A newly orphaned young girl named Maiken is bound for the Dutch East Indies on the Batavia, one of the greatest ships of the Dutch Golden Age. Curious and mischievous, Maiken spends the long journey going on misadventures above and below the deck, searching for a mythical monster, but the true monsters might be closer than she thinks. And then we are following a young boy in 1989 who is named Gil, who is sent to live off the coast of Western Australia among the seasonal fishing community where his late mother once resided. There, on the tiny reef-shrouded island, he discovers the story of the infamous shipwreck, the Batavia. So it was really fun. I would definitely look up content warnings, though, if you're interested at all in this, because there are... because the young boy, Gil, ends up getting bullied quite a bit. And it's definitely a book on grief and loss from both perspectives. So definitely go into that. I think I will end up getting the physical copy of this at some point, because it is a story, like, I don't know what I was expecting from it, but it was also just, I don't know, it was just pleasant to read as well. Particularly, I really enjoyed Maiken's point of view, and as well as Gil's. It was a nice contrast of each other, but I feel like I'm not quite smart enough to try to quite understand what exactly was the main message from, or that connected the two, aside from that Maiken's ship, the Batavia, ends up shipwrecked at one point, and Gil ends up learning about the shipwreck and lives on the island that they were shipwrecked on. So that in itself was really interesting. And Jess Kidd I've read from before. I actually really enjoy her work. The last one, what was it? It was Things in Jars I really enjoyed. So Just Kid is one of those authors that is just like, when they publish something, I'm just like, okay, let's check that out. So the next book that I read was also an ALC from Libro FM, so thank you so much to them offering that, and that is Where We Go When All We Were Is Gone by Sequoia Nagamatsu. So this one is the one that I didn't quite, that once reading it, I didn't mind How High We Go in the Dark, because there were elements within How High We Go in the Dark that I am forgetting just because of the anthologic type style it was in. And but Where We Go When All We Were Is Gone is in the similar format, in which we get a bunch of different perspectives, all from the same author. And it's something that's happening on Earth. And this one, I feel like, was a bit more confusing than How High We Go in the Dark. It's a collection of 12 fabulous and genre-bending stories inspired by Japanese folklore, historical events, and pop culture. In Rakubi, a man who has the demonic ability to stretch his neck to incredible length tries to save a marriage built on secrets. The recently dead find their footing in the Inn of the Dead's orientation for being a Japanese ghost in Girl Zero. Okay, so I think I need to reread this, because ultimately I wasn't sure what I was getting into going into it. I thought personally, just how it was framed was just basically based off the first story, which was The Return to Monster Island, which was a story about the kaiju, and how the kaiju basically have returned to Earth, and we as in the world, but mostly Japan is trying to figure out how to live coherently with the kaiju as well as study them. And that's what I kind of thought it was going to be about, like How High We Go in the Dark, but based around the events of kaiju. And that's not the case. Where We Go When All We Were Was Gone is more about Japanese mythology and folklore. We get a bit of everything. I remember that particular short story that the synopsis had talked about in terms of the Inn of the Dead's orientation for Japanese ghosts. I actually really enjoyed that, because it describes all these ghosts that all these options for ghosts when they enter this hotel. So I think I gave it a low rating because I misunderstood what this book was about. So it may end up being something that I reread when I feel in the mood and want to return to it and better understand what's going on. So, okay. The next book, the one that I forgot to update my list with, was Chef's Kiss. Probably the only book that I read from my December TBR, but this is by Jarrett Melendez, Danica Bryan, Hank Jones, Hassan Otsmane Al-Hio, and we are following English graduate Ben Cook, who wants to get a job writing. However, when he goes and applies for all these jobs, they say he doesn't have enough experience, and so he ends up getting a job as a cook in a restaurant, and still is looking for a writing job, but realizes that he really does enjoy being a chef, and particularly his coworker, who is very handsome, that he's slowly falling in love with, and he ends up having to figure out whether writing was really something that he wanted to do, or if he wants to continue being a chef. Ultimately, I love the art style in this book. It was very whimsical, and it's like pretty contemporary, a little whimsy, but the storyline like helps with the whimsy, particularly because in order to be a chef at this restaurant, Ben is put through some challenges, particularly to satisfy a pig named Watson. And I mean, it's just super cute. And ultimately, I think that was something too that I was really loving, was the food elements in here. It was really nice. Watson in particular, I'm not the biggest fan of pigs in general, but as art, like, they are adorable. So it was really nice. I think I as much as I really enjoyed this graphic novel, I am hoping that there's more to this, because my one gripe with this one in particular, because the reason I gave it a 4-star is because the whole challenge of the self-growth of Ben Cook wasn't as much as I had wanted it to be. At one point, Ben is told, like, quit, like, thinking about it, like, face your problems head on, and he ends up being faced with a challenge. That's probably a spoiler. Let me rephrase that. There is an element when he's trying to choose if he wants to continue on with continue with the chef job or go with a possible writing job, and really tries to determine what he wants to do. Has some pressure put on him by outside sources that feel like they know better than him, and rather than facing the challenge head on or facing the problem head on like he is told throughout the book and what I thought was the purpose of his growth, he doesn't. And that kind of bothered me. So I don't feel like there was there was some growth, but like it didn't come to fruition as well as I would have hoped. So 4.5 stars, because that bothered me. But I do, if there is more to this, I really hope to get it because it was really cute. And then the final book that I read for 2022 was actually Sleepy Hollow, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. This was another audiobook that I had gotten from Libby, from my library, and this was a classic. And all I knew about, and I talked about it, I will talk about it again in my most disappointing books of 2022, which I think will be out after this video, in all honesty. So the only thing I knew about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is what I have watched. So basically, I remember the cartoon as a kid, that cartoon that would play on Cartoon Network like towards Halloween every year, which I always thought was really short and didn't like provide much of anything. Like, all I knew was that Ichabod Crane like was kind of a scaredy cat and was a bit paranoid, and ultimately ended up meeting the demise of the Headless Horseman. That's all I really knew, as well as what I had learned from Sleepy Hollow, the movie with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci, directed by Tim Burton. And that one, of course, expanded the story. We get more of a witchy element, good witch element or white witch element from Christina Ricci. Johnny Depp gives Ichabod Crane a kind of a romantic flair to it, though that tends to be Tim Burton and Johnny Depp anyway. And we get Ichabod, a story from Ichabod of his mom being kind of like a natural witch, only for his stepdad to be very religious and strict and enjoy corporal punishment. Was it his dad? Or was it just, I don't know, I assumed it was his dad, I don't know. But we get more of the storyline. So when I read, when I was started to listen to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, I thought, okay, I should, like, something should be cleared up, and it really wasn't, because it's a very short audiobook. First off, it's only like an hour and 15 minutes long, so I was able to read it in less than that because I read it on 1.75 speed. And really this was a product of 1820s. So Ichabod Crane was kind of just Ichabod Crane is a teacher in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, and basically, like men in the 1820s, is just looking to move up in life. He wants to do that by marrying Catherine Van something, I forget her last name, Katrina Van something, I don't know, Van Pelt, I don't know, who is very much a good looking gal who has very sexy ankles and feet, apparently, but very little is said about herself aside from that she can be a bit of a minx, and Otherwise, everything was said about the land that would come with that marriage because of her father's in her father's wealth and his farm and all this and that. So basically, that's what Ichabod was looking at, and that's what he kept talking about. Like, that's what this whole book was basically talking about, was that he would inherit or like get control of that once he married Katrina. And then, of course, Brahms is a clashing character who very much was vying for Christina's love as well. So, I don't know. It was just meh. It was a short story written in the 1820s by a white guy that saw women as property, and yeah, I mean, Ichabod is still, I mean, I guess this is kind of spoilery, but there's been a bunch of adaptations about it, but it's also been out since the 1820s. So basically, Ichabod Crane is chased by the Headless Horseman, which is supposed to be like a Sleepy Hollow mythos, and he has disappeared, though it's not quite known if it was really like the Headless Horseman of the night. Like, no one quite believes, like, some do, some don't, but some also suspect that it might have been Brahm. So I don't know what it was supposed to convey. That, like, I don't know, that this teacher shouldn't have like vied for something more than he should have wanted. I don't know. It was kind of a disappointment to end 2020 on, in all honesty. It ended the year with kind of a disappointing reading of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But I am curious because Ashley from AFrolicThroughFiction had actually brought it to my attention through one of her videos, because she was talking about reading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow as well as adaptations or retellings of it, and that made me curious too, because I hadn't ever read that. So when I saw that that was available through Libby, I was like, oh, let's try it. So now I'm kind of interested in like where stories branch off from there, of any retellings. So if you have a Sleepy Hollow, Legends of Sleepy Hollow retelling that you'd like to recommend, please leave it down in the description down below, or comments down below. So I ended up reading a 9th book that I also forgot to add to my reading spreadsheet. So I apologize for the chaos that this December wrap-up video is turning out to be, but that is We Are Each Other's Harvest, Celebrating African American Farmers, Land, and Legacy by Natalie Basile. This is a nonfiction anthology by the author of Queen of Sugar. Basile brings together essays, poems, photographs, quotes, conversations, and first-person stories to examine Black people's connection to the American land from emancipation to today. In the 1920s, there were over 1 million Black farmers. Today, there are just 45,000. Basile explores this crisis through the farmers' personal experiences. In their own words, middle-aged and elderly Black farmers explain why they continue to farm despite systemic discrimination and land loss. The returning generation, young farmers who are building upon the legacy of their ancestors, talk about the challenges they face as they seek to redress issues of food justice, food sovereignty, and reparations. These farmers are joined by other influential voices. Poetry and inspirational quotes are woven into these diverse narratives, adding richness and texture, as well as stunning 4-color photographs from photographers Alison Guti and Malcolm Williams and Basile's personal collection. I personally know that I was interested in this originally before my critical plant studies class. I didn't read it until after my critical plant studies class was over, just because my critical plant studies class helped me aware that I was taking a very narrow mindset of what food sovereignty and what it means to me. And I am so happy that I ended up listening to this book. I do hope to get a physical copy at some point, because I wasn't aware that there were photographs within this book. And I think it has some very important topics. For instance, the discrimination and racism that the USDA ends up practices and has been practicing for years, which I feel like is very like an important part of history that we don't hear about. And so I feel like this is was a very important read, and I very much appreciated it and gave it 5 stars. And I will reflect my stats here to adjust for this 9th book that I completely forgot to update you about. So my apologies. Otherwise, that is the books that I read for December 2020. If you've read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down in the description down below, or comments down below. And if you made it this far, let's go ahead and put a ghosty, because Legend of Sleepy Hollow, I don't know why, it's just ghost. Let's do ghost. Why not? Oh, one thing I did enjoy about the Legend of Sleepy Hollow was the description of food in there. It sounded really good, actually. It was very poetic in how some of the food descriptions were done. That was probably the best writing of the book. Otherwise, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you have yet to do so, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in another video. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading as well as your life right now, and I will see you in another video very soon. Cheerio.